On Christmas Eve, in a red velvet Santa suit that smelled of mothballs and false cheer, I gave my son the keys to a brand new car and my wife of 35 years a single white envelope. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, thinking it was some kind of joke. The laughter died in her throat when she saw the first line of the divorce papers. For 60 years, I had played every part I was given: the dutiful son, the tolerated son-in-law, the silent husband. That night, I finally wrote my own script, and the curtain was coming down on our life together. But to truly understand the deafening roar of that final liberating act, you must first understand the 35 years of crushing silence that preceded it. Hello, my good people, my kings, and my beautiful queens. I want to start by sending a special shout out to my wonderful and loyal subscribers who are always with me in the comments. Today's greeting goes out to Whitney from Washington, Christy from Dakota, as well as Pamela, Kaya, Jesse, and Jonathan. Your support means so much to me. Thank you for being here with me. If you have ever felt like a stranger in your own life, like you were living out a story written by someone else, then this testimony is for you. For those new to our family, please subscribe and tap that bell. The journey is a long one, but the destination is freedom. My life has been a masterpiece of quiet desperation, painted on a canvas of immense wealth. I am 60 years old, and for more than half of my life, I have been an employee, a husband, and a prisoner. My prison is a sprawling glass and marble mansion in a gated community, a place so immaculately decorated by my wife, Amanda, that it feels less like a home and more like a high-end furniture showroom where no one is allowed to sit down. Our marriage was a business deal, plain and simple, brokered by our fathers to merge two family dynasties. I was 25, full of my own dreams, when I was informed that I would marry Amanda Kingston. She was the sole heir to her father, Edward Kingston, the ruthless, miserly founder of the IT giant, American Systems. My father was his partner. The marriage was a seal on their alliance. My feelings, and Amanda's, were never considered relevant to the transaction. So, for 35 years, I have gone to work in the same glass tower, rising to the empty title of Senior Vice President. My job is to stare at spreadsheets, to find ways to make a man who is already obscenely rich even richer. That man, my father-in-law, still looks at me with the same cool disdain he did on my first day, as if I am a disappointing stock that he is legally obligated to keep in his portfolio. Then, at the end of each long gray day, I go home to Amanda. Amanda, who is also 60, wears her age and her wealth like a suit of armor. She sees our life not as a partnership, but as a performance, and in her eyes, I am constantly forgetting my lines. Just last night, I came home to find her standing in the cavernous living room, a frown etched on her perfectly made-up face. "Jonathan, I saw the pictures from the Henderson Charity Gala," she said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "You were standing next to Senator Phillips. Did you even say anything of substance, or did you just stand there like a shadow?" She sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "Your father could command a room. You just occupy space." That was her favorite blade, the one she twisted the most often. My failure to be my father. He had been a lion, a titan of industry. I was, in her eyes, a quiet, steady, and utterly uninteresting lamb. A provider. A function. She managed our vast fortune, doling out my allowance while she funded a life of galas, designer clothes, and social jockeying. I learned, long ago, to survive by making myself small, by retreating into the quiet corners of my own mind. My true life was lived in the 30-minute commute to work, listening to old jazz albums that made me feel something real. It was lived in the stolen moments of a solitary lunch in a small park, watching ordinary people laugh and live lives they had actually chosen. I had accepted this. This was my cage, and it was gilded, comfortable, and secure. I believed I would simply endure it until the end. Another one of my father-in-law's assets to be liquidated upon my death. Hope was a foreign country I had stopped trying to visit decades ago. Then came a Tuesday, a day no different from the 10,000 gray Tuesdays that had come before it. I was in my office, the city spread out below me like a map of other people's lives. I had just survived another condescending meeting with Edward, my spirit feeling ground down to a fine dust. As I gathered my things to leave, I looked out at the sea of cubicles where the summer interns worked. And that's when I saw a splash of impossible color in my monochrome world. A young woman, an intern, was laughing with a friend. It wasn't the polite, calculated laugh of our corporate world. It was a real laugh, a bright, genuine, head-thrown-back burst of pure joy. It was like seeing the sun for the first time after a lifetime in a cave. I had no idea who she was. But the light from her smile pierced through 35 years of shadow and struck a part of my heart I thought had turned to stone long ago. That single, fleeting image of her smile became a contraband item I smuggled into the prison of my daily life. I would be sitting in a mind-numbing board meeting, with my father-in-law droning on about market shares, and the memory of that bright, genuine joy would flash in my mind, a secret warmth in the cold, sterile room. It was nothing, of course, just a moment. But in a life made up of endlessly gray, repetitive moments, it was everything. I started to notice her, the way you notice a single, resilient wildflower growing in a crack in the pavement. Her name was Carrie. She was a summer intern from the state university, and she moved through the oppressive, silent halls of American systems like a visitor from another planet. She was kind. It was a simple, profound quality that was almost alien in this environment. She smiled at the janitors. She knew the security guard's name. She treated everyone with a basic human decency that the executives, in their rush to the top, had long since forgotten. Our first real interaction happened by the coffee machine a week later. I was pouring my usual cup of black, bitter coffee, a drink that perfectly matched my mood. She was at the counter, trying to coax a packet of creamer from the dispenser. "Careful with that stuff, Mr. Smith," she said, her voice bright and teasing. "I hear that's the kind of coffee that can dissolve a spoon." I was so taken aback I almost dropped my cup. In 35 years, no junior employee, let alone an intern, had ever spoken to me with anything other than hushed, fearful reverence. They saw the title on my door, the last name I shared with the ruling family, and they kept their distance. But she looked at me as if she saw just a man, tired and in need of a better cup of coffee. "It gets the job done," I managed to say, a rusty, unfamiliar smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "Well," she said, finally winning her battle with the dispenser, "if you ever want to try something that doesn't taste like a punishment, the little cafe on the corner makes a life-changing latte." She gave me another one of those brilliant smiles, and was gone, leaving me standing there with my bitter coffee, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the scalding liquid in my cup. As fate would have it, Carrie was assigned to a team that was compiling data for a quarterly report I had to present. It meant she had a legitimate reason to come to my office, to bring me files and spreadsheets. Our interactions were brief, professional, but they became the anchor points of my day. She was smart, incredibly so, And she asked questions no one else bothered to ask. She wasn't just processing the numbers. She was trying to understand the story they told. One afternoon, she noticed the old jazz album covers I had framed on my wall. "John Coltrane," she said, her eyes lighting up. "My grandfather loves him." And just like that, we weren't a senior VP and an intern anymore. We were two people talking about music, about the soulfulness of a saxophone, about the way a single piece of music could transport you to another time and place. These small moments of connection were like sips of fresh water after decades in a desert, and they made the return home each night that much harder. I would walk into my house, the ghost of a real conversation still on my lips, feeling a flicker of the man I used to be, only to have it extinguished by the cold front of Amanda's presence. "I got the preliminary schedule for the winter charity circuit," she said one evening, not even looking up from her tablet as I walked in. "There's a gala on the 5th. You'll need to have your tuxedo cleaned. And for God's sake, Jonathan, try to look like you're actually happy to be there this time. Your perpetual gloom is a terrible reflection on me." There it was. My existence, my feelings, all reduced to how they reflected on her. The contrast between her cold dismissal and Carrie's bright, genuine curiosity was a physical pain. The turning point came on a Thursday night. I was stuck at the office late, buried under a mountain of paperwork for a hostile acquisition my father-in-law was planning. The building was quiet, most people having long since gone home. As I was rubbing my tired eyes, there was a soft knock on my door. It was Carrie, holding 2 pizza boxes. "I figured you hadn't eaten," she said simply. "And my roommate bailed on our pizza night. Pepperoni and mushroom. Hope that's okay." We ate in the deserted break room, the silence of the empty skyscraper a strange, intimate bubble around us. The professional barriers seemed to melt away in the low light. She asked me a question that no one, not even Amanda, had asked me in 30 years. "What did you want to be, Mr. Smith, before all this?" she asked, gesturing vaguely at the glass tower around us. The question cracked open a door inside of me that had been sealed shut for decades. And I told her. I told her about my dream of being a history professor, of spending my days surrounded by old books and forgotten stories. I told her about the life I had imagined before my own story had been written for me. She listened, not with pity, but with a deep, compassionate interest. When I had finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me, her gaze steady and clear. "You know," she said softly, "it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It's never too late. For 35 years, my life had been a long, slow march toward an ending that was already set in stone. The idea that I could change the story, that I could still choose my own path, was the most radical and terrifying thought I'd had in my entire adult life. Driving home that night, her words echoed in my head. For the first time, I didn't just see the bars of my golden cage. I saw the lock. For 35 years, I had been living in a tomb. But a 22-year-old girl had just handed me a flashlight and told me to look for a door. And for the first time in my life, I actually started looking. The seed of hope that Carrie had planted in my mind with her simple, revolutionary words, "It's never too late," began to grow in the quiet, fallow ground of my soul. For the first time in decades, I began to make choices. They were small, almost imperceptible acts of rebellion. I started taking a different route to work, exploring old side streets instead of the sterile highway. I stopped listening to the morning news reports on the radio and instead put on the old John Coltrane albums from my youth, letting the defiant, soaring notes of his saxophone fill my car. During my lunch breaks in the park, I stopped just staring into space and started reading again, devouring history books with the hunger of a man who had been starved for knowledge. I was, piece by piece, reacquainting myself with the Jonathan Smith I had been forced to bury 35 years ago. My conversations with Carrie became the central pillar of this secret reconstruction. We moved from the office break room to the small sunlit cafe she had recommended. Those lunches became my sanctuary. In the warm, bustling atmosphere of the cafe, surrounded by the scent of coffee and pastries, the gray, oppressive weight of the Kingston Tower, and my cold, silent mansion would melt away. In that small booth, I was not a senior VP or Amanda's husband. I was just Jonathan, and Carrie, with her insatiable curiosity and writer's soul, wanted to know his story. So I told her. I told her about the arranged marriage, the constant low-grade humiliation, the feeling of being an actor in a play I had never auditioned for. She didn't just listen. She heard me. She heard the words I wasn't saying, the decades of quiet pain held between each sentence. In turn, she told me of her dreams. She wanted to travel the world and write novels, to tell the stories of people whose voices were never heard. She saw the world with a vibrant, empathetic clarity that I found breathtaking. One afternoon, as I was telling her a story about my own father, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. It was a simple, compassionate gesture, but the warmth of her touch was like a lightning strike. It was the first time in as long as I could remember that a woman had touched me with genuine, uncalculated affection. And in that moment, I knew I was in trouble. The quiet, manageable spark of hope she had ignited in me was threatening to become an uncontrollable fire. The point of no return came a few weeks later. We had both been kept late at the office, and on impulse, I asked her if she wanted to take a walk. We left the cold glass and steel canyon of downtown and went to the old city park, the one where I ate my lunch. The autumn air was cool and crisp, and the leaves crunched under our feet. We walked in a comfortable silence for a while, just two people existing in a moment of peace. She told me today that my life has been a disappointment to the family name, I said quietly, breaking the silence. She said it as casually as she would comment on the weather. Carrie stopped walking and turned to face me. In the dim glow of the park lights, her eyes were full of a deep, profound compassion that undid me. "You are not a disappointment, Jonathan," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "You are a man who has endured a lifetime of quiet cruelty with a grace most people could never imagine. You are a survivor." No one had ever called me a survivor. They called me successful, privileged, a Smith, a Kingston. But she saw the truth. She saw the prisoner, not the cage. Overwhelmed by a tidal wave of gratitude and a longing I could no longer suppress, I leaned in and kissed her. It was a hesitant, clumsy, and terrifying kiss. The kiss of a 60-year-old man who felt as nervous as a 16-year-old boy. She didn't pull away. She responded with a gentleness and a warmth that felt like coming home to a place I had never been. And just like that, our secret began. It was a thing of stolen moments and quiet corners. A shared look across a crowded conference room. A quick coffee in a cafe far from the office. A walk in the park where we could hold hands without fear. For the first time in my life, I was living. I had a secret world, a vibrant, colorful world with Carrie that made the gray, monochrome world of my real life bearable. The change in me was subtle, but Amanda, in her own way, noticed. "You seem different lately," she commented one night at one of our silent, obligatory dinners. Distracted. She looked at me with a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. "Don't tell me you're finally growing a personality at your age, Jonathan. It would be terribly inconvenient." Her insults, which used to be able to pierce me to the core, now glanced off me. They couldn't hurt me anymore. Her world, her opinions, her cold, empty mansion, none of it could touch me. Because I had a secret. I had a place to go, a person who saw me, a feeling that was real. My love for Carrie was a shield, and behind it, I began to plan my escape. I secretly met with a lawyer, a discreet man who specialized in high net worth divorces. I didn't want to file yet. I just wanted to know my options. I needed a map. For 35 years, I had been lost in the wilderness, but now, for the first time, I was looking for a way out. The lawyer gave me a clear, if difficult, picture of what a separation would entail. The legal battle would be brutal, but I was not without rights. I was not without a claim to the fortune I had helped build. Leaving the lawyer's office that afternoon, I felt a sense of power I had never known. The future was no longer a foregone conclusion. It was a choice. A terrifying, messy, and beautiful choice. I was walking on air, my mind full of possibilities. As my taxi stopped at a red light, I glanced out the window, and my heart stopped. A long black town car was idling in the next lane, and in the back seat, staring directly at me with his cold reptilian eyes, was my father-in-law, Edward Kingston. I don't know if he recognized the man in the lobby of the building I had just left, or if it was just a coincidence. But the look on his face was not one of recognition. It was one of calculation, of a king surveying his domain. The warmth of my newfound hope vanished, replaced by an icy dread. I had been planning my escape from a cage, but I had just been reminded of the immense, terrifying power of the man who had built it. The brief, accidental eye contact with Edward Kingston was like having a bucket of ice water thrown on the warm, secret fire of my new life. The joy and hope that had been blooming within me withered into a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened paranoia, seeing shadows in every corner, convinced that I was being watched. Every black town car I saw on the street made my heart seize. I became cautious, distant. I limited my lunches with Carrie to the crowded anonymous cafe, and I stopped walking with her in the park. The risk was too great. The cage, I was beginning to realize, had eyes everywhere. My fear was not unfounded. A week after the incident, I was summoned to my father-in-law's office. His office was on the top floor, a vast, cold expanse of glass and steel that overlooked the entire city. It was a room designed to make you feel small, and it always succeeded. Edward was not sitting behind his massive desk. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the world he owned. "Jonathan," he said, without turning around, "I've been thinking about your future with the company." I stood there, my hands clasped behind my back, feeling like a schoolboy in the principal's office. "Oh?" was all I managed to say. "You've been a steady presence for 35 years, he continued, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Reliable, consistent. But you lack ambition. You lack the fire your father had." He finally turned to face me, his eyes like chips of granite. "However, an opportunity has come up that requires stability above all else. We are expanding our European operations. I'm giving you the London office, A 3-year assignment, effective at the end of next month. It's a significant promotion. A chance for you to finally step out of the shadows. My blood ran cold. It was a promotion, yes, but it was also a sentence. An exile. He was offering me a bigger, more luxurious cage in another country, thousands of miles away from Carrie, thousands of miles away from any hope of building my own life. It was a brilliant, cruel move. How could I refuse a promotion? It would look ungrateful, suspicious. He was testing me, cornering me, using his power to gently but inexorably force me back into my box. Did he know about Carrie? Or did he just sense my newfound flicker of rebellion and decide to extinguish it before it could become a flame? It didn't matter. The result was the same. Amanda will be thrilled, he added. A final, perfect checkmate. She's always wanted to live in London. He had made the decision for both of us. My opinion was irrelevant. I told Carrie about it that afternoon, in a hurried, whispered conversation by the elevators. I told her about the promotion, the exile, the way he had trapped me. I felt a crushing sense of defeat. The walls were too high. The warden was too powerful. She listened, her expression calm and steady. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy or advice. She just asked me a simple, powerful question. "What do you want, Jonathan?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. Not what Edward wants, or what Amanda expects, or even what you think I want to hear. After 60 years, what does Jonathan Smith truly want for the rest of his life? She was right. I could accept the promotion. I could go to London and live out the rest of my days in a slightly different version of the same gilded cage, and the secret, beautiful world I had shared with her would become just another faded memory, another dream I had given up on. Or I could fight. For the first time, I could actually fight. "If you go to London," she said softly as the elevator doors opened, "nothing will ever change for you. You'll just be trading one prison for another." Her words echoed in my mind all evening. I sat through another silent dinner with Amanda, who was already browsing London real estate on her tablet, not even bothering to ask for my opinion. I looked at her, at the cold, beautiful stranger I had shared a house with for 3 decades, and I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, just a profound and final sense of release. Carrie was right. It was time to stop living the life I was given and start living the life I wanted. But I knew I couldn't just file for divorce. The Kingston legal team would descend upon me, bury me in paperwork, and strip me of everything. They would paint me as an ungrateful, adulterous old fool. I needed to end it, but I had to do it on my terms. I needed to take control of the narrative, to make a statement so loud and so final that it could not be ignored or twisted. And that's when the idea began to form. Our annual family Christmas Eve party, a lavish affair hosted in our cold, perfect mansion, was the grandest performance of our sham marriage. It was the perfect stage. This year, I would not just be an actor. I would be the writer and the director. The next Saturday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping. But I wasn't looking for myself. I went to a car dealership, and I looked at the new sporty sedan my son, James, had been dreaming about for months. It was an extravagant, almost reckless purchase. But as I signed the papers, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This was the first move in my new life. An act of pure, untainted love for my son before the storm broke. That Monday, I walked into my lawyer's office. He looked up, surprised to see me again so soon. "I've made a decision," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I want you to forget the exploratory phase. I want you to draw up the divorce papers." He nodded, pulling out a legal pad. "And when were you thinking of filing?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I need them in my hands by December 24th, I said. For 35 years, Christmas at my house has been a command performance. This year, I'm writing a hell of a final act." December descended upon the city in a flurry of cold air and glittering lights. For most people, it was a time of joy and family. For me, it was the final month of a secret war, a month spent living deep behind enemy lines. On the outside, I was the same Jonathan Smith, the dutiful husband preparing for a prestigious move to London, the quiet senior vice president dutifully closing out the fiscal year. But on the inside, I was a different man entirely. I was a strategist, a saboteur, counting down the days to the single, explosive moment that would grant me my freedom. Amanda was in her element. The annual Kingston Smith Christmas Eve party was the crown jewel of her social calendar, her command performance as the city's preeminent hostess. The house was a whirlwind of activity. Florists, caterers, and party planners moved through the rooms like a well-trained army under her precise and imperious command. She was consumed with the details of the party and, simultaneously, with the logistics of our move to London, ordering catalogs for bespoke furniture and discussing private club memberships on the phone. She was so busy architecting our future that she never noticed I was quietly dismantling our past. My days were a study in duality. The Jonathan who went to the office was a gray, efficient ghost. I sat in meetings, nodded at the appropriate times, and completed my work with a diligence designed to prevent any suspicion. But my lunch hours and evenings were dedicated to planning my revolution. I met with my lawyer and a forensic accountant he'd recommended. Together, we meticulously untangled the complex web of my finances, a web Amanda and her father had been spinning for 35 years. What we found was illuminating. While a significant portion of the wealth I had helped generate had been skillfully diverted into trusts that were difficult for me to access, there were other assets, stock options, and investment accounts in my name that were part of my original compensation package that had been overlooked. For the first time, I had a clear picture of my own financial standing. I was not the penniless dependent they believed me to be. I had resources. I had ammunition. While Amanda was ordering new luggage for London, I was slowly moving my real life out of the house. Not the expensive furniture or the art she had chosen, but the small things that contained pieces of my soul. Old dog-eared history books from my college days, my father's collection of jazz records, a handful of photographs from my childhood that Amanda had deemed too sentimental for display. I packed them into cardboard boxes and took them to a small anonymous storage unit on the other side of town. I was curating the artifacts of the man I intended to become. My meetings with Carrie were my lifeline. They were rare, risky, and essential. We met in quiet, out-of-the-way coffee shops where no one from our world would ever go. She was the only person who knew the truth of my plan. She was terrified for me, but her belief in me was the fuel that kept me going. "Are you sure about this, Jonathan?" she asked one afternoon, her hand covering mine on the small cafe table. "I've never been more sure of anything," I told her, my voice steady. "I'm not just leaving Amanda. I'm leaving a life that was never mine to begin with." The final act of my masquerade took place at a pre-Christmas charity dinner at the City Art Museum. I played my part to perfection. I stood by Amanda's side, smiled at the mayor, made small talk with the judge. I even endured a conversation with Edward Kingston, who placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Smith," he said, his voice a low rumble of condescension. "I hear you've finally accepted the London post. A wise decision. Perhaps there's a spark of your father's ambition in you after all." I just smiled. "I aim to please, sir." Years ago, a comment like that would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt. That night, I felt nothing but a cold, detached amusement. I was no longer his puppet. I was an actor, playing my final role, and I already knew how the play would end. A week before Christmas, I picked up the car I'd bought for James and stored it in a private garage. That evening, I called him at college. He was still distant, the echo of his mother's words still coloring his tone. I didn't argue or try to defend myself. I just talked to him about his classes, about his plans. I told him I was proud of the man he was becoming. The ice in his voice thawed, just a little. It was a bittersweet moment, a father saying a quiet goodbye to his son's childhood before the world shifted on its axis. The morning of December 24th arrived. The house was humming with the final preparations for the party. Amanda, in a silk robe, was a general directing her troops, her face flushed with the thrill of the impending social triumph. I sat in my study. On the polished surface of the mahogany desk lay 2 envelopes. One was a large, thick manila envelope containing the divorce papers, legally drawn up and ready to be served. The other was a small, festive card, a set of car keys tucked inside. The study door opened. It was Amanda. "Jonathan, stop hiding in here. You need to put on the Santa suit. The society photographer will be here in an hour to get the family shots before the guests arrive." Her voice was a sharp, impatient command. I looked up at her, and for the first time in years, I smiled a real calm smile. "Of course, dear," I said. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." She thought I was putting on a costume for a party. She had no idea I was really putting on my armor for the last battle of my life. I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom, the Santa suit a grotesque parody of holiday cheer. The synthetic red velvet was coarse against my skin, and the fake white fur trim tickled my nose. The suit had been Amanda's idea, of course, purchased years ago for the sole purpose of this annual Christmas Eve performance. I adjusted the scratchy white beard, its elastic band digging into my skin, and looked at the stranger in the mirror. For 35 years I had worn a different kind of costume, the suit of a dutiful husband, the mask of a content corporate executive. Tonight, this ridiculous disguise felt more honest. It was an open admission that everything in this house, including the man at its center, was a complete and utter fraud. The party was already in full swing when I descended the grand staircase. The house was filled with the elite of our city, a sea of expensive perfume, polite laughter, and hushed conversations about stock prices and vacation homes. Amanda had orchestrated it all perfectly. It was a beautiful, soulless spectacle. I was led to a large, throne-like chair beside a monstrously oversized Christmas tree, the designated spot for the party's main attraction. As I sat, the 2 envelopes in the deep pocket of the velvet suit felt as heavy as stones. One held a future. The other would detonate the past. Amanda, shimmering in a silver gown, posed beside my chair for the society photographer, her hand resting on my shoulder in a perfect pantomime of affection. "Isn't he wonderful?" she said to the camera, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Jonathan just adores doing this for the family." The first hour was a blur of forced jollity. I handed out small pre-approved gifts to the children of business associates, my ho-ho-hos sounding hollow and absurd in my own ears. I smiled until my face ached, all the while watching the clock, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm of anticipation. Finally, my son, James, arrived. He looked handsome and uncomfortable in a suit, navigating the sea of his parents' colleagues with a polite reserve. The time had come. "And now," I boomed, my voice amplified by the suit's padding, "Santa has a very special gift for a young man I am incredibly proud of." I beckoned James forward. He approached, a look of mild embarrassment and curiosity on his face. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, festive envelope. "James," I said, my voice suddenly serious, the Santa persona falling away for a moment. "A man needs his own road in life, and his own way of getting there. I want you to know, no matter what, that I am proud of you, and I love you." I handed him the envelope. He opened it, his eyes widening in disbelief as he pulled out the keys. "Dad, is this for real?" he stammered, looking at the key fob, then back at me, his face alight with a joy so pure and overwhelming it was like a physical blow. "It's real, son," I said. In that moment, all the guests, all the phoniness, all the pain disappeared. There was only my son, who threw his arms around my neck in a fierce, heartfelt hug. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you," he whispered. It was the last perfect moment of my old life. As the guests applauded this touching display of fatherly love, I gently disengaged from my son's embrace and turned to my wife. The mood shifted. The air crackled with anticipation. "And of course," I announced, my voice ringing through the suddenly quiet room, "I have one final, very special gift. For my dear wife of 35 years, Amanda." She smiled, a smug, indulgent expression, clearly expecting a velvet box containing a diamond necklace or the keys to a European car. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the second envelope, the large, white, legal-sized one. I held it out to her. I watched her face as she took it. The confident smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion as her fingers registered not a small gift-wrapped box, but a thick, crisp stack of paper. The party guests watched, a collective, curious hush falling over the room. She tore the envelope open, her movements sharp with a dawning sense of dread. Her eyes scanned the first line. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The color drained from her face. The carefully constructed mask of the perfect hostess shattered, revealing the raw, ugly shock beneath. It was as if she had been struck by lightning. She looked up at me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that only I could hear. "What is this joke, Jonathan?" I looked at her, my face calm behind the ridiculous white beard. "It's no joke, Amanda," I said, my voice clear and steady, loud enough for the people closest to us to hear. "It's my gift to myself. It's my freedom." Her father, Edward Kingston, materialized at her side, his face a thundercloud. "Smith," he snarled, "have you lost your mind?" I stood up from the Santa throne, the room silent and frozen. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and pulled off the scratchy white beard. I took off the red hat and dropped them both onto the chair. I was no longer Santa Claus. I was no longer Amanda's husband or Edward's puppet. I was just Jonathan Smith, a 60-year-old man who was finally, for the first time in his life, breathing free air. I looked at my furious wife, my thunderous father-in-law, and the sea of stunned, silent faces. Then I turned to my son, who was staring at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes, and I gave him a single, brief, meaningful nod, and then I walked. I didn't run. I walked with a calm, steady pace right through the heart of the crowd, who parted for me as if I were a ghost. I walked out the front door of that cold, perfect mansion, leaving behind the suit, the lies, the party, and 35 years of a life that had never been mine. I didn't know what came next. I just knew the incredible, terrifying, and glorious feeling of being completely and utterly free. The cold December air was a shock to my lungs, a clean, sharp contrast to the stuffy, perfumed atmosphere of the party. The heavy front door of the mansion clicked shut behind me, the sound as final as a gavel. For a moment, I just stood on the perfectly manicured lawn, the manicured prison yard, and listened. The silence of the snowy night was broken only by the muffled gasp of the shocked party guests inside. I had just detonated a bomb in the center of my own life, and the quiet aftermath was both terrifying and utterly exhilarating. I didn't have a plan, not for the long term, but I had a plan for tonight. I walked past the rows of gleaming Mercedes and BMWs, a ridiculous figure in a red velvet suit without a beard, until I reached the street. A single, nondescript sedan was waiting for me at the corner, just as I had arranged. I got in. The driver, a discreet professional hired by my lawyer, didn't say a word. He just pulled away from the curb and drove me toward my future. We drove to a part of the city I barely knew, a neighborhood of quiet brick apartment buildings. He pulled up in front of one, handed me a set of keys, and said, "Everything is as you requested, Mr. Smith." Then he was gone. I walked into the building, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and opened the door to apartment 3B. It was small, clean, and completely empty, save for a simple mattress on the floor, a lamp, and the few boxes I had moved from my storage unit earlier that week. It smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. I walked to the window and looked out at the anonymous city lights. A few minutes later, I saw the first flashing lights of a police car, followed by an ambulance racing toward the mansion I had just left. Amanda, no doubt, was putting on the performance of a lifetime, the shocked, abandoned wife, perhaps suffering a panic attack. The opening salvo in the war for public opinion. I took off the Santa suit, piece by piece, and left it in a crumpled heap on the floor. I stood there in my own clothes, in the middle of my own empty room, and for the first time, I felt the sheer, crushing weight of what I had done. I had blown up my world, and the fallout was just beginning. I was alone, on Christmas Eve, with nothing but a mattress and a handful of books. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed over me. Had I made a terrible mistake? The next morning, Christmas Day, the Kingston Empire struck back. My phone began to ring at dawn. It was my lawyer. "They're moving fast, Jonathan," he said, his voice grim. "Edward's legal team filed an emergency motion this morning. They've frozen every asset they can touch, claiming you're mentally unstable and a flight risk after your public outburst. They're trying to cut you off at the knees." The news followed. The society columns, all owned by companies with ties to Kingston, were painting a brutal picture. I was a cruel, ungrateful man who had humiliated his loyal wife in a fit of senile jealousy. They hinted at an affair, mine of course, with a young subordinate. They were trying to destroy my reputation before I could even begin to build a new one. Then came the call I was dreading. It was my son, James. His voice was a raw mix of anger and confusion. "What did you do, Dad?" he demanded. "Mom is a complete wreck. Grandpa is furious. The whole family is... It's a disaster. Why would you do that to her? To us?" I listened, my heart aching. I didn't try to defend myself or attack his mother. "I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you, son," I said, my voice quiet. The way it happened, it was the only way I could finally be free. That's all I can say right now. The car is yours. It's at the garage I texted you about. No matter what, that's a gift from your father, with all my love. When you're ready to hear my side of the story, I'll be here. I will always be here for you. I hung up, feeling like I had just been kicked in the gut. This was the price of my freedom, the potential loss of my son. The old Jonathan would have crumbled. He would have called Amanda, apologized, begged to be let back into the cage. But as I stood there in my empty apartment, a new, unfamiliar strength began to rise up in me. I had known this was coming. I had prepared for it. I called Carrie. Her voice was a balm on my raw nerves. "I saw the news," she said softly. "Are you okay?" "I'm free, Carrie," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "They're coming at me with everything they have, but I'm free." "I knew you could do it," she said, a quiet pride in her voice that felt more validating than any stock option or promotion ever had. "You're the bravest man I've ever met." We talked for a long time, and her belief in me was the foundation upon which I began to build my new life. I was no longer a puppet. I was no longer a shadow. I was a man fighting for his own soul, and I was not alone. The war had just begun, but for the first time in my life, I was ready to fight. The first few days of my new life were a lesson in modern warfare. The battlefield was the internet, and the ammunition was slander. The Kingston media machine, a well-oiled engine of reputation management and destruction, roared to life. I watched, with a strange sense of detachment, as they painted a portrait of a man I didn't recognize. "Jilted exec's bizarre Santa meltdown," one headline blared. "Kingston heiress humiliated by erratic husband," another whispered. They portrayed me as a mentally unstable, pathetic old man who had snapped under the pressure of his far more successful wife's life, lashing out in a cruel and public manner. They were brilliant at it, weaving a narrative so compelling that even I almost believed it. My bare apartment became my war room. While the world outside consumed the lies, I was working. My lawyer, a sharp and resilient man named David Chen, was on the phone with me constantly. We adopted a strategy of dignified silence. We would not engage in the mudslinging. We would not give them the satisfaction of a public fight. Our war would be fought in the one place where their control was not absolute: the courtroom. Our first move was to counter their emergency motion to freeze my assets. We were prepared. My forensic accountant had already traced and documented the stock options and accounts that were legally and indisputably mine, established long before Amanda had consolidated her control over our finances. We filed our response, a calm, meticulously detailed document that made their claims of my mental instability look foolish and desperate. A small victory. But the judge unfroze a significant portion of my personal assets, giving me the resources I needed to fight. With my war chest secured, it was time to go on the offensive, and I had a weapon they never anticipated. For 35 years, they had seen me as a quiet, unimaginative number cruncher, a harmless cog in their great machine. They had forgotten one crucial detail: a cog sees everything. For 3 decades, I had managed the financial strategies of American systems. I knew every dark corner, every shell corporation, every legally gray tax shelter Edward Kingston had ever created to hide his billions. I had never acted on it, never even considered it, It was simply the ugly, unspoken architecture of the world I lived in. Until now. We drafted our countersuit. The first 20 pages were a standard, if aggressive, petition for my rightful share of the marital assets, citing my 35 years of service and contribution to the growth of the family fortune. But the final 5 pages were a quiet declaration of nuclear war. In a section titled Discovery, we requested a full, unredacted forensic accounting of a very specific list of 20 obscure offshore holding companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. I didn't accuse Edward of anything. I didn't have to. I simply stated that, in order to ascertain the true value of the marital estate, these entities, in which I had reason to believe marital assets had been invested, needed to be examined. I sent the file to my lawyer and sat back. The silence that followed was more profound than any headline. For 2 days, there is nothing. The slanderous articles in the society pages stopped. The aggressive posturing from Amanda's legal team ceased. We had fired a torpedo into the heart of their empire, and they were in damage control, trying to figure out how the quiet, docile puppet had learned to build a bomb. In the middle of this silent, high-stakes war, my new life began to quietly take root. Carrie came to my apartment one evening. She didn't come to talk about the lawsuit or the media storm. She came with a bag of groceries. She walked into my bare kitchen, pulled out a pan, and started cooking, filling the small space with the scent of garlic and basil. We ate a simple meal of pasta at the small, cheap table I had bought, the sounds of the city a distant hum below. We talked about a history book I was reading. She told me about a character for a novel she was dreaming up. It was the most normal, most peaceful, most profoundly real evening I had spent in 35 years. It was what I was fighting for. The call came the next morning. It was my lawyer. I could hear a note of stunned disbelief in his voice. "Jonathan, you're not going to believe this," he said. "I just got off the phone with Edward Kingston's lead counsel, the big man himself. Their tone has changed." I held my breath. "The public retractions for the articles will be issued tomorrow," Chen continued, a slow smile spreading through his words. "And they want to talk, not through their attack dogs. They want a quiet, off-the-record meeting to discuss a settlement. Jonathan, you did it. You got their attention." I looked out the window of my small, empty apartment, not at the city, but at the reflection of my own face in the glass. I was still a 60-year-old man who had lost his family. I was still a man whose world had been burned to the ground. But the puppet had just made the puppet masters flinch. And I was just getting started. The settlement meeting was held in the polished, soulless conference room of a neutral, high-priced law firm downtown. It was a space designed for corporate warfare, a sterile environment of glass and chrome where human emotion was an unwelcome liability. I sat on one side of a ridiculously long mahogany table with my lawyer, David Chen. On the other side, an army. There was Amanda and her lead attorney, but they were not in charge. At the head of their side of the table, radiating an aura of cold, barely contained fury, was Edward Kingston, flanked by 2 of his most senior corporate lawyers. This was not a divorce proceeding. This was a treaty negotiation between 2 warring nations. I had entered this family as a young, powerless man, intimidated and overwhelmed. I sat at this table as a 60-year-old man with nothing left to lose, and I had never felt more powerful in my life. I was calm. My hands were steady. I had spent the last week with Carrie, not hiding, but living. We had gone to museums, jazz clubs, and spent hours in old bookstores. She had reminded me what it felt like to be a person, not a function. I walked into that room not as their puppet, but as the man Carrie saw. Edward's lead counsel, a man with the predatory smile of a shark, began the proceedings. He spoke of my 35 years of loyal service and, on behalf of the family, offered a generous severance package in the interest of a swift and private resolution. The offer was insulting, a fraction of what I was owed, designed to be a final power play, a final reminder of my place. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Chen. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He opened his briefcase and took out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the vast, polished table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Edward Kingston. It was not a legal document. It was a simple, alphabetized list of 20 offshore holding companies. I watched Edward's eyes scan the page. For the first time in the 35 years I had known him, I saw a flicker of something beyond arrogance and disdain. I saw fear. He knew in that instant that I was not there to negotiate my exit from a marriage. I was there to negotiate the price of my silence. The game had changed. My client, Chen said, his voice calm and even, is not interested in your client's severance package. He is interested in a clean and equitable separation, one that reflects his decades of contribution to the growth and, shall we say, strategic financial structuring of American systems. The battle that followed was tense, but the outcome was never in doubt. They had more lawyers, more money, more power. But I had the truth, and a single key that could unlock the door to their financial ruin. My demands were simple, and they were not just about money. First, the financial settlement. We settled on a lump sum payment, a clean transfer of funds that would sever all ties. It was a number that would ensure I would never have to worry about money again. Second, my exit from the company. A full vesting of all my stock options, as stipulated in my original, long-forgotten contract. Third, a gag order. They demanded I sign an ironclad NDA, forbidding me from ever speaking about them or the company. I agreed, with one condition. The NDA had to be mutual. They were legally forbidden from ever speaking about me, my character, or the reasons for our divorce to any media or third party. With that single clause, I had silenced their media machine forever. My reputation was my own again. Finally, the house. And the matter of the primary residence, their lawyer said, eager to move on. Amanda can have it, I said, speaking for the first time. The room went silent. Amanda and Edward both stared at me, stunned. I am signing over all my claims to the house and its contents, I continued, looking directly at my soon-to-be ex-wife. I want nothing from it. It was my prison for 35 years. It is my gift to you. Later, during a short recess while the final papers were being drawn up, Amanda cornered me in the hallway. The fury was gone, replaced by a cold, bewildered resentment. "Are you happy, Jonathan?" she hissed. "You've destroyed our family. You've humiliated me. For what? That little intern?" I looked at her, at the woman I had spent a lifetime with, and I felt nothing but a quiet, sad pity. "This isn't about her, Amanda," I said, my voice gentle. "This is about me. Our family was a business contract. Today, I negotiated my exit. You have everything you ever wanted. The Kingston name, the mansion, the money. I am just taking the one thing I was never allowed to have, a life of my own. I truly hope you find some happiness in all of it. Goodbye." I walked away, leaving her standing alone in the marble hallway. When we walked out of that building an hour later, the papers were signed. The war was over. I was a free man. Chen clapped me on the shoulder, a huge grin on his face. "So, what's next, Jonathan?" he asked. "A private jet to a beach in the Caribbean? A trip around the world?" I stopped on the busy sidewalk, the sounds of the city no longer feeling like a cage, but like a symphony of possibility. I thought of the jazz clubs Carrie and I had visited, the museums we'd walked through, the history books I'd started reading again. I thought about my old buried dream. "No," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I was thinking of going back to school. My lawyer, David Chen, stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "School?" he repeated, as if he'd misheard. "Jonathan, you just won a settlement that could buy a small university. And you want to be a student?" "I've spent my entire life in a boardroom, David," I said, the city noise a celebratory symphony around me. "I think it's time I spent some time in a library." And that's exactly what I did. The year that followed was the most challenging, most terrifying, and most joyful of my entire life. The divorce was finalized with the cold, quiet efficiency of a corporate merger. The money appeared in the new accounts my team had set up. The Kingstons, bound by the mutual gag order, faded into a bitter, angry silence. And I, Jonathan Smith, for the first time at 61 years old, began to live. I didn't buy a penthouse or a private jet. I bought a modest, beautiful brownstone in a quiet, historic neighborhood, the kind of place with old trees and real neighbors. I filled it not with the cold, minimalist art Amanda had favored, but with overflowing bookshelves, comfortable chairs, and the warm, rich sounds of my father's old jazz records. Carrie and I spent weeks scouring flea markets and antique shops, finding pieces with history, with soul. It was the first home I had ever had that truly felt like my own. That fall, I enrolled at the local university as a non-degree seeking graduate student in the history department. I was, by a margin of 40 years, the oldest person in every class. I sat in seminars surrounded by bright, ambitious 20-somethings, and I felt not out of place, but energized. They had the fire of youth, but I had the wisdom of a lifetime. I wasn't there for a grade or a career. I was there for the pure, unadulterated joy of learning, of discussing the fall of empires and the rise of ideas with people who were as passionate as I was. My old dream, buried for so long, had finally been resurrected. Carrie was the heart of this new world. Our relationship, freed from the shadows of secrecy and the pressures of my old life, blossomed into a true and equal partnership. She moved into the brownstone with me, her laughter filling the rooms that had been silent for so long. She was working on her first novel, her laptop a permanent fixture on the kitchen table. We were an unlikely pair, the retired executive turned student and the brilliant young writer. But we shared a deep and abiding love, built not on obligation or strategy, but on mutual respect and a shared delight in the simple, beautiful moments of a life well lived. The final piece of my healing came on a crisp Saturday afternoon the following spring. My son, James, came to visit. Our phone calls over the past year had been tentative at first, but slowly, the wall between us had crumbled. He had seen his mother's cold fury after the divorce, had witnessed her obsession with social standing over her own son's happiness. He was a smart, compassionate young man, and he had finally begun to understand. He walked into my home, looking around at the books and the comfortable clutter with wide eyes. "It's different," he said. "Good different." We sat for hours and talked, really talked, for the first time in years. I told him my side of the story, not with anger, but with a quiet sadness for the lost years. He told me about his life, his dreams. He had decided to become a teacher. He told me the new car was great. "You know, Dad," he said as he was leaving, "I've never seen you look so light." "That's because I am, son," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. I finally put down the weight I was carrying. After he left, I saw an article on a financial news site. American Systems was under a formal SEC investigation for financial irregularities, triggered by an anonymous but incredibly detailed tip. The Kingston Empire was starting to crack. I felt a flicker of grim satisfaction, but it was distant. It was a story about other people, a world I no longer belonged to. Amanda, I had heard, still lived in the cold mansion, still threw her perfect parties, but her kingdom was shrinking, her power fading. My revenge was not in her destruction, but in my own quiet, joyful reconstruction. That evening, I was in my study, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books. Carrie was curled up in an armchair, reading over a chapter of her manuscript. Light from the fireplace danced on the walls. It was a scene of such profound and simple peace that it almost brought tears to my eyes. I thought back to the man in the Santa suit, the desperate, hollowed-out man who had been willing to detonate his world for a chance at freedom. He felt like a character from a book I had read a long, long time ago. I felt a distant pity for him, but I was not him anymore. For the first time in my 62 years, my life was not a transaction, an obligation, or a performance. It was simply, quietly, and completely my own, and it was a damn good story.